back to the talking portion of House Lannister. Hope you enjoyed the no talking version if you were just into pencil scratching. But this one will have a little bit more Lannister fun facts. To begin, I actually read up on what happened with the Tarbecks and Reynes because I felt a little embarrassed at my attempt at telling the story of what happened to them. So I looked it up, and it had nothing to do with King Aerys. So what happened was Tywin's father, Tytos, was known as the Laughing Lion, and where Tywin was shrewd and ruthless, but an effective leader, Tytos was pretty much the opposite. He was given the nickname the Laughing Lion because he wanted to be liked and loved by everyone, and even people that would insult him, even to his face, he would shower with gifts to try to win their affection, gifts and titles. Among the highborn in Westeros, there was even a game called Twisting the Lion's Tail. And what this was basically the highborn of Westeros would insult Tytos to his face and see who could. And the game was to try to see who could insult him the most. And the more they insulted him, the more he just laughed it off. As a result, people would take advantage of his inept nature. He often loaned out large sums of money and never collected, and even would forgive debts. As a result, people became more and more aware of this, and they would take advantage of him by. When they became aware of this, more and more lords would get loans from him, knowing full well that they would never have to pay it back. And there was one woman of, I believe it was Ellen Reyne of House Reyne, who married into the Tarbeck family, and she was able to work her way in. She was able to kind of maneuver her way politically into Casterly Rock, and was able to enrich the Tarbeck house, which was ancient, going back to the Age of Heroes, but also very poor. And as a result, she was able to secure large sums of money to reinforce and renovate Tarbeck Hall. The other well-known member of the Reyne family was Roger Reyne, also known as the Red Lion. And after years of... So Tytos was the Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West, and as a result of his misrule, the West was filled with corruption and general lawlessness. So much so that the king had to send in soldiers to try to clean things up. But as soon as they would leave, things would go back to disrule. And even at the age of 10, Tywin was aware of how not good of a leader his father was and how inept he was. And by the time he was, I believe he was only 17 when he took over Casterly Rock, even though his father was still alive. And when he took over for Casterly Rock, he demanded that all the debts to House Lannister be paid, because during the rule of Tytos, the power of the House of Lannister began to wane, and other houses like Reyne and Tarbeck have been taking advantage of them. and had been enriching themselves in the process. So when he took over, he demanded that the houses that had owed money and pay it back, and if they were unable, to send a hostage in their place. When Roger Reyne received this edict to pay back the loans, he instructed people to not follow it, and Waldron Tarbeck, the Lord of House Tarbeck, actually went to Casterly Rock to speak with Tytos to kind of go over Tywin's head. However, when he showed up, it wasn't Tytos that he spoke to, it was his son, Tywin. And Tywin had him captured and put into a dungeon. Now this is what started off. This is pretty much started the whole chain of events that led to the downfall of Tarbeck and Reyne. Because he was captured and put into the dungeons of Casterly Rock, House Tarbeck called their bannermen, and they went to Casterly Rock to get him back. Tywin took a host and met the Tarbeck host in battle and crushed them. And afterwards, he went to Tarbeck Hall and put the place to the torch. And after this, he went to Castamere. And during these events, Roger Reyne had become mortally wounded, and he was brought back to Castamere, where they held up and were prepared for a siege. So what Tywin did, I believe I mentioned this in the previous video, he did flood the place. The way he did it was he caved in the entrance. I'm not sure how, but he caved in the entrance to Castamere, diverted the nearby river, and that as it overflowed on the dams, it started to flood into the castle of Castamere and drowned everyone inside. And apparently to date, like even and ever since that time, nobody has nobody has entered Castamere, nobody has gone inside, because I believe it's considered a cursed place and nobody wants to go in there. So that is how Tywin reestablished the power of House Lannister, a power that his father had squandered and lost during his rule. So yeah, when I was going through the last video, I realized I really didn't remember a whole lot about that story. So I thought I'd look it up, and that's basically what happened. I believe both Reyne and Tarbeck were houses that date back to the Age of Heroes, which is the age that is just after the prehistory of Westeros, and I believe that's even further back than biblical times in our history. It's always fascinating to me the idea that a family that has existed for that long ends up just not existing anymore. And as you can see, I talked about the pattern. You can see there's a bunch of streakiness in the gold lion. And what I'm going to do is, after I kind of get all the little white spots filled in, because there are quite a few of them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swipe down. I'm going to swipe down with the pencil and just really go over spots where it's the color's not matching, and try to fill it in and make it look like one solid uniform color. And this process does add a little bit more time to anything with a gold or silver coloring to it. But when it's done, it actually looks kind of nice, and it has kind of like a little bit more of a sheen to it than the other Prismacolor pencils. I don't remember a lot of their names, but there was the section in World of Ice and Fire mentioned there was a lot of Lannisters that existed. From, like I said, from the Age of Heroes, and they were the kings, called Kings of the Rock, Kings of the Westerland, and then eventually they swore fealty to Aegon the Conqueror after the Field of Fire, and became Wardens of the West. And throughout the Westeros history, whether you're talking about Jaehaerys the Conciliator, whether you're talking about the Dance of the Dragons, the Mad King Aerys, all of their stories somehow involve a member of House Lannister in one way or another. And even now, I'm completely at a loss for remembering all of their names. There is one member. It was Tywin's sister, who's named Jenna. She was married to a Frey. Her father, Tytos, set up the marriage. And she does appear in the books. I believe it's Feast for Crows. And she's a very pretty and buxom woman in her youth who threatened to spill out of her top. But in the books, she's in her 50s and has grown fat. Is described as grown fat with enormous bosom, and pretty much sat in on Jaime's war council for her husband without anyone really objecting. And there was a quote by her. I believe I don't know if it was her husband or if it was a different Frey, but they were captured. And this is a bit of a spoiler for Feast for Crows, so I'll put a little tag there. But somebody from House Frey was hanged. I think I'll say details aren't important, but somebody from House Frey was hanged, and her daughter described the member of House Frey as being hung. And she corrected her, Jenna Lannister corrected her, saying, "He was hanged, dear, not hung. He's not a tapestry." Which I thought was rather grim, but also kind of humorous. It was very typical of George R.R. Martin. If you've read the books, you'll notice that he actually does have quite a sense of humor, George Martin, that he does write into the books. In fact, there is a description of I believe it's a mercenary company who's not effective, and somebody says they're so ineffective that they run if you so much as fart in their general direction, which is clearly taken from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. In fact, there's one scene they actually use that in the show. There's a scene where this guy, I don't remember what season or what episode it was, but it was before a battle involving Daenerys' army. And this single guy comes out and starts yelling taunts in, I believe it's in Old Gis. It's some language that isn't English. And what he's saying, I believe what he's actually saying in that language is, "Your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries," which is a line from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And I even saw there's like 3 cities that exist. I want to say probably either in the Dothraki Sea. It's somewhere in Essos. Probably around Karth, probably in that far part of the world. And I believe the cities are called Moherys, Laharis, and Caherlis. And somebody asked George Martin, is that a reference to Larry, Moe, and Curly of the Three Stooges? To which George Martin confirmed that yes it is. The giant that is, there's a giant that appears at the wall in the books. He actually appears in the show too, and his name is Wun. It's spelled W-N-W W-U-N-W-U-N. And George Martin is from New Jersey, and he is a huge New York Giants fan. And 1-1 is actually a reference to the number 11. And I can't remember which player for the Giants it references, but it actually is reference to, he named the Giant after the player for the New York Giants. And that is something artists do like to do, is put those little Easter eggs into their works. I think it's just something that they have fun with, and those are the kind of, I kind of like those things too. It just makes it fascinating to kind of peer into the mind of the person writing the book. I'm also trying to be careful about giving too much away if people are watching this and also reading the books at the same time. For this one, there is a little bit, the wax around this is actually kind of interesting because it doesn't act like wax from the normal pencils. And this wax actually, like I said, it's a bit shinier. It's more metallic in nature, and it's hard to see, but there actually is a little bit of gold dust kind of rubbed into the paper as I've been working on this. But because the pencil I'll be using around in the background is going to be crimson red, it will easily just color over the gold and it won't be visible. Those are the kind of things I have to think about when I'm drawing these, going light to dark. And it looks like we're almost done with most of the coloring. I just have to do the teeth and the tongue, and then we'll start working down the gold and get it into a nice single color. Actually, I'm going to sharpen my pencil first. One of the scenes in the show that was actually in the books too was when Tyrion, the scene that I kind of nerded out the most was anytime they mentioned heraldry. And Tyrion's squire, Podrick Payne, who, by the way, is cousin to Ilyn Payne, who is the headsman in King's Landing, so the executioner. And when I say headsman executioner, without giving a spoiler away, he cut off someone's head, and if you've made it through the first season or the first book, you know who I'm talking about, so I won't say any more than that. But yeah, Podrick is actually cousins with Ilyn Payne. He also doesn't. Yeah, had his tongue ripped out. Anyway, when he was getting a little sidetracked there, so Tyrion was teaching Pod about the different houses and saying it was important to know the different banners and to be able to recognize them. So when the Dornish were sending an envoy to meet with the Lannisters, to meet with King's Landing, and this is when This is when they met Oberyn Martell, the Viper. There was the host, the Dornish host, was coming into view, and Podrick was able to identify all the different banners. And I remember Tyrion said, "Well done, Podrick. I don't think I could have named them all." And in his thoughts he said, "That's not true. I could have named them all. I just wanted to make him feel better about himself," which is kind of a sweet little character trait. I thought of Tyrion. I'm gonna resharpen my pencil for the teeth. And there was actually, I don't remember where it was in the books, but at one point Podrick, his character was kind of defined by insecurity and kind of sheepishness. He was a little, not very assertive, not very confident, and didn't talk very much. And one time, Tyrion, as a joke, made Pod stick out his tongue to make sure that he wasn't missing a tongue like his cousin Ilyn. And the banner for House Payne, Payne, is a white and purple checkerboard filled with golden coins. And that one is not a fun banner to do because the gold color on those coins, I did a few different versions of them. One version I actually drew little dragons on the gold coins because that is what the coin in Westeros is called, as a dragon. And I drew them with a one-headed dragon, but they're actually, the gold coins have a three-headed dragon on them. And when I found that out, I was like, I was torn about whether or not I should redo it or not. And I did. And I actually ended up going with a design where it was more of a historical heraldric design that had two half circles in the coin instead of a dragon design. And coloring around those dragons was a huge pain, so I was happy to save myself the trouble and redo it with a simpler design. Now for coloring this one, it's not going to be perfect just because there's so many different spots to color in. But the trick is to just try to work your way down. And colored pencil is not the fastest medium to use for something like this. For doing solid colors, I think marker or even paint or ink might be faster to do. But I actually kind of like the amount of control and just the way the pencil looks after it's completed. And so I don't mind I don't mind the time-consuming aspect of these colored pencils. The other thing I really enjoy about George Martin's characters, this is something I kind of noticed very early on in the book, is that there weren't characters that were good or bad. There were characters that you did follow, and there was characters that you did root for. So between the Starks and the Lannisters, I would say most people kind of would root for, if there's any one character that probably had more people on their side. For Stark, it was Jon, even though he's, bastard born. And for Lannister, it would be Tyrion. I would say it'd be Tyrion. The thing that's always, that I found fascinating about the characters that he wrote is the fact that they were very morally ambiguous. Particularly Jaime, after he becomes a point of view character, and after he undergoes his transformation. So, spoiler alert for A Clash of Kings, the second book of the series, in the second season of the show. Once Jaime gets his hand cut off, he actually gets his hand, which happens at Harrenhal, and it is Vargo the goat, who actually has a really bad lisp. That's kind of how his character is defined. He is actually loses his hand, I believe, to a fat Dothraki that is part of his Vargo the Goat's posse. And once Jaime loses his hand, that's when he becomes a point of view character. And I thought it was fascinating that George Martin chose a whole lot, because he's not a point of view character in the first book at all. And in fact, his character is kind of, I always thought he was a very stereotypical, rich kid. He is a good swordsman and a fine knight. The youngest member of the Kingsguard to be appointed the Kingsguard. But that was actually a move made to spite Tywin. And Jaime was known as the Kingslayer because he cut open the Mad King Aerys' throat. And he committed regicide. The thing that was always fascinating was he just kind of took that in stride, being called Kingslayer. And he has the moment where he's talking to Brienne about it, and he kind of opens up about his thoughts on that and what actually happened. And how he said, he basically ordered me to kill my whole family. And anyone in my position would have done the same thing. Yet I'm the one who's cursed with the name Kingslayer. I'm the one who has the sin of regicide hanging over my head. And he's kind of saying this when he's feverish, because removing his hand had caused an infection, and so he started to get sick from it. And that was a fascinating scene. That was featured in the TV show. And the story of Tywin and the Mad King Aerys is actually fascinating in and of itself, because they became friends when they were both fighting the War of the Nine Penny Kings. That's where Tywin won his spurs, as they call it, became a knight. And when King Aerys took over after Maekar II, he made Tywin his hand. And Aerys was filled with all sorts of ideas and plans for Westeros, but they never came to fruition because he never took them seriously. Kind of reminds me of some of those a couple characters from Parks and Rec, where they're quote unquote idea people, and then they think their value is coming up with an idea, but really ideas are actually kind of cheap. It's only, like they say, talk is cheap. It's really about the effort that you put into something. And Aerys talked about building aqueducts in Dorne and making the desert bloom, building a canal underneath the Red Mountains. He talked about building a second wall 100 leagues north of the existing wall and claiming the lands for himself. But none of these things ever came to fruition because he would lose interest in them within as they called it, within a moon's turn. And the day-to-day operations of ruling the Seven Kingdoms mostly fell onto Tywin's shoulders. And over time, it became known throughout the land that Tywin was more or less the real seat of power. Tywin was really the one in charge. That was something Aerys did not care for. And over time, the rift grew between the two of them. And that was why there was Jaime won a tourney. I believe that was held at Casterly Rock. And that was when Aerys forced himself on Joanna, was during that tourney. And Jaime won it, and he was offered a spot on the Kingsguard, which gave the appearance that of high honor, but really the reason he was doing it was to take away the heir of Casterly Rock, because that's what Tywin had hoped, or who Tywin had hoped would take over Casterly Rock. And as remember, the Kingsguard, you're not allowed to hold any lands or hold any offices. Kingsguard's kind of like in a way, it's kind of like joining the Night's Watch, but in the opposite direction. It's actually more of a prestigious honor. It's more of an honor, and it's more prestigious, whereas joining the Night's Watch is often an alternative to some form of punishment. And so, one of the things that's kind of a pain with the coloring is I would like to be able to just color along this arm here. But if I do that, it's going to give it a different color appearance. And sometimes, like with the Tyrell Golden Rose, I would do the petals in different directions. I think I would kind of draw them all towards the center, and that gave each leaf kind of its own texture, and kind of gave it a uniform texture, but it also gave it a different color. But it actually gave it kind of a nice effect. But for this lion, I'm just gonna color everything in the same direction. Looks like we're almost done with that. Kind of see already there's the tail hasn't been colored in yet, and so that it still has some streakiness to it. The line itself is more or less one solid color. And when doing this technique, getting the gold color all to be one uniform color, it kind of helps to have more of a rounded tip of the pencil rather than have a sharp one. The sharp one's not going to smooth it out as easily, and kind of the edges are a little hard to get into. And for those, you just kind of, especially along edges here, you just kind of have to go slowly, just kind of place it along the edge and just pull it down. Just pull it down. And having a good source of light really helps too. And if you do colored pencil, I highly recommend using a light pad, because the backlighting will show you where you missed some spots. I actually had, so when I was coloring in the first video, I actually had the sketch still taped to the back of it, so there really wasn't a whole lot of light coming through. And when I took it off, I noticed there was way more pock marks in the drawing than I would have otherwise had seen. We're just going to finish just swiping it down, just cleaning it up. Yeah, I haven't read this story about kind of the relationship between King Aerys II and Tywin Lannister in a while. But basically, Tywin suffered one insult after another in the hopes that he would quit his office. But Tywin felt more duty to the realm, and he swallowed his pride and did his duty, which is something an effective leader should be able to do. Like I said, he's an effective leader, but merciless. And sometimes being a leader means making hard choices and not being liked. That was something that Aerys was not really able to do. And as time went on, there's a few more spots. I sharpened my pencil to finish that up, but for the most part we are done with gold. Another character trait about Tywin that was kind of interesting was he actually had a shaved head, completely shaved, and golden mutton chop sideburns. Because as soon as he started to lose his hair, he just decided to remove all of it, which is definitely kind of a bit of a macho trait. It definitely seems like something his character would do. Remember, I tried listening to the audiobook series for Game of Thrones at one point, just so I could. I was gonna actually planning on doing it while working on banners. Unfortunately, the version, I think it might be the only version I have, but the guy who was reading it did a voice of Tyrion that was similar to someone inhaling helium right before doing the reading. And because Peter Dinklage did such an amazing job playing Tyrion, and because he's an actor who actually does have dwarfism, we know that, people with that condition don't have, high-pitched cartoony voices. And so it was just something I couldn't really get over. He was basically trying to sound like this when he was reading for Tyrion, and I was like, I can't do it. Okay, I made a little bit of an oops along here. I colored over this tail. So what I'm going to do is go back over it. I colored this with an 8, so I'm going to color it in with start with a 3. And if you notice, I put some tape around the bottom of it. I did that with all the pens because I have them in a jar, and instead of having to pull each one out and look for it, or in the drawer and try to figure out which pen is which, I decided to put some tape on it, make it a little easier. So, just going to touch this up. If you do this, if you kind of retouch up an area, like I said, I think I've said this before, but if you do touch up an area that you've kind of colored over, if you know what line weight you use, like I know this was an 8, you don't want to go over it with another 8, otherwise it's going to look too thick and it's going to kind of look like you colored over it again. So that's why I actually went 2 sizes down just to start with. That actually covered it up pretty well. And looking over it again, it looks like I have one teeny tiny area around the eyes. Left to do. Let's color that in. And then as far as gold is concerned, kind of look at it at an angle, see if there's any spots that I missed. And looks like maybe. And also, if you're going to do this, it's good. So right now, like I'm touching up some of the area, like the little corners here, and I'm just barely touching the pencil to the page. And just kind of going in there. And really I'm almost just moving the pattern in the same direction, not even trying to like color anything in. Do that with the claws on the tips of their paws. That reminds me of a really bad joke I heard when I was an English major for a year. What is the difference between a cat and a sentence? The difference is a cat has claws at the end of its paws, and a sentence has paws at the end of its claws. Yes, it is a bad one. Alright, there's still a few differences just along the edge, so I'm just very lightly going over those. I'm trying to see if there's any other areas that I colored over with my pen. So I'm going to brush it off first. And let's see here. Looks pretty good. I haven't really gone outside the lines too much. There is one little spot, a teeny tiny spot along the paw. I'm gonna use a size 1. Just go over it. It is a little weird going over the colored pencil with an ink pen, because sometimes it can feel like the pencil's a little waxy and slippery. But if you're delicate, use a smaller pen size and don't overdo it. It can look like you were just really colored in the lines perfectly. All right. So that is going to do it for gold. So now we are going to move on to the crimson red field for the background, and that should go a little faster than the gold.